The people who were strongly against slavery and wanted the immediate abolition of it were known as abolitionists. Some of these abolitionists consisted of whites, and some of them were slaves themselves. These unique people fought for what they believed in and began an anti-slavery movement, which ended slavery once and for all. William Lloyd Garrison was a Massachusetts man and born in 1805. He represented the freedom of press and of speech. He was a writer and editor, and at the age of 25, he joined the abolitionist movement. He became associated with the American Colonization Society, an organization that believed blacks should emigrate to a territory on the west coast of Africa. At first, the society seemed to promote freedom and the happiness of blacks. However, their main goal was to reduce the number of free blacks in the country and preserve the institution of slavery. By 1830, he rejected the programs of the American Colonization Society, and on January 1st, 1831, he published the first issue of his anti-slavery newspaper known as The Liberator. In speaking engagements and through The Liberator, he advocated the immediate emancipation of all slaves. However, this view was unpopular during the 1830s, even for Northerners who were against slavery. Most people throughout the nation thought that slaves and the American society could not bond together, but Garrison thought otherwise. He believed that over time, all blacks would be equal in every way compared to the country's white citizen. He believed that blacks were also Americans who were entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Garrison had gained a reputation for being the most radical of the abolitionists, and in 1832 he helped organize the New England Anti-Slavery Society, and the following year, Garrison, along with Arthur and Lewis Tappan, founded the American Anti-Slavery Society. These were the first organizations that promoted the immediate emancipation of slavery. Garrison's main impacts that led to the abolition of slavery was through media and his newspaper. Frederick Douglass was known as the father of the modern civil rights movement. He was born in 1818 to a slave mother and a white father, and in 1838 he ran away to New York. He was inspired by William Lloyd Garrison after seeing him speak at the Bristol Anti-Slavery Society annual. Douglass was asked to become the society's lecturer for 3 years after giving a speech a few days later at Mass. He was mentored by Garrison, but later developed different point of views from him. Douglass always worked to make the lives of African Americans better. He helped recruit blacks for the Union Army and later published an abolitionist newspaper called the North Star on December 3, 1847. The newspaper turned into the most influential black anti-slavery newspaper of all time. The newspaper denounced slavery and emancipation of women and other oppressed groups. Furthermore, he helped slaves escape to the north using the Underground Railroad. Douglass was also a leader in the abolitionist movement and became the first free slave to hold a high rank in the United States government. He was also the U.S. Minister and Consul General to Haiti. Harriet Tubman was born into slavery in 1820 and later freed herself along with other slaves. She was afraid of being sold to the South, which caused her to escape. Tubman escaped with the help of a white neighbor who gave her a piece of paper telling her where to go. She stayed at Philadelphia where she met William Still, a station master of the Underground Railroad. She was taught the goals of the Underground Railroad by the Philadelphia Anti-Slavery Society, leading her to relocate families into Canada. She returned to Maryland to help other families escape. She then gained the nickname Moses for freeing 300 blacks from slavery from the south to the north, just like Moses freed the Israelites from slavery from Egypt to Israel. She later met former Governor William H. Seward and his wife, where they provided a home for Harriet Tubman, her parents, and her niece Margaret. Tubman was also close with John Brown and Frederick Douglass and helped them talk about ways to end slavery. During the Civil War, Harriet Tubman was a soldier, a nurse, and a spy at Fortress Monroe. She also helped John Brown plot the raid on Harper's Ferry and helped with the fundraising to gain weapons and money for the war. John Brown was born on May 9, 1800, into a deeply religious family in Torrington, Connecticut. His father was strongly against slavery. The family then moved to northern Ohio when John was 5, an area that was well known for its anti-slavery views. Brown was considered the most militant abolitionist and a man of action. He was someone who would not be stopped on his mission to abolish slavery, and on October 16, 1859, he led a group of 21 men on a raid of the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. He planned to arm slaves with the weapons that he and his men seized from the arsenal. However, by local farmers, militiamen, and Marines led by Robert E. Lee, within 36 hours of the attack, most of Brown's men were captured and killed. John Brown did not emerge as a figure of major significance until 1855, followed 5 of his sons into the Kansas Territory, where he became a leader of anti-slavery guerrillas and fought an anti-slavery attack against the town of Lawrence. The following year, Brown went to a pro-slavery town and brutally killed 5 of its settlers. Brown and his sons would continue to fight in the territory and in Missouri for the remainder of the year. He then returned to the East, where he began to think more seriously about his plan for war in Virginia against slavery. He then sought money to fund an army in which he could lead, and on October 16, 1859, he set his plan into action when he and 21 other men, 5 of them black, raised the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry. Brown was wounded and quickly captured and moved to Charleston, Virginia, where he was tried and convicted of treason. Although many people were shocked by his last words, many Northerners began to speak favorably of militant abolitionists. Sadly, he was hung on December 2, 1859. Sojourner Truth was born into slavery in 1797 in Ulster County, New York, where her name was originally Isabella Baumfree. As a slave, she was sold several times, and when she was a teenager in the 1820s, she escaped from her owner after being treated horribly and sold away from her family. When her owner was mad, he would beat her with a pile of sticks or other bad weapons for no good reason. When she was free, she changed her name to Sojourner because at the time it meant traveler. She was also a preacher, and people called her the Lord's colored preacher. She was the most passionate abolitionist and the earliest one. Even Martin Luther King Jr. used some of her quotes in his speeches. In 1828, Isabella moved to New York City and soon after became a preacher in the Perfectionist. Her faith and preaching brought her into contact with abolitionists and women's rights crusaders, and she later became a powerful speaker on both subjects. She traveled extensively as a lecturer, particularly after her publication of the narrative of Sojourner Truth, which detailed her suffering as a slave. Her speeches were not political, but were based on her unique interpretation as a woman and a former slave of the Bible. With the start of the Civil War, Truth became increasingly political in her work. She agitated for the inclusion of blacks in the Union Army, and once they were permitted to join, she volunteered by bringing them food and clothing. Wendell Phillips was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1811. He was a Harvard graduate of law and later left his profession for committing his life to the anti-slavery movement. He wrote abolitionist pamphlets, editorials for William Lloyd Garrison's Liberator, and spoke largely for the cause. He hated slavery so much he didn't vote until after the emancipation was established. He was known famously for his public speaking and how he could calmly stop violent mobs. He put in 40 years of his life to gain equal rights for African Americans. He was also the president of the American Anti-Slavery Society from 1856 to 1870. He hated the word white, so he asked for the removal of it from each law. Although he was an abolitionist, he opposed for Lincoln to gain a second term in presidency. He was a unique kind of person because he inherited a great amount of wealth, but fought for the right of normal workers. Boom! Garrett Smith was a wealthy man from Utica, New York. He became an abolitionist in 1835 when attending a conference in Utica which was mobbed by anti-abolitionists. He was president for the Anti-Slavery Society for 3 years. He was also a station master for the Underground Railroad and sold his lands to fugitive slaves for $1. He was one of the Secret Six who financed John Brown's raid at Harper's Valley. He was the only abolitionist to hold office and ran for president 3 times. He was also very close to Frederick Douglass. He first tried to use legal means to end slavery. Garrett then spent 1 term in Congress to try and advance his agenda. He was frustrated with the dissolution of the Union coming closer and resorted to violence. He joined a group of Massachusetts abolitionists in lending support to the anti-slavery struggle in Kansas and ultimately in support of John Brown's plan to set up a permanent base of operations in the mountains of Virginia. In the period leading up to the raid on Harper's Ferry, Brown made frequent visits to Smith and his associates to discuss the outline of his plan. When war finally broke out between the North and the South, Smith became a strong and vocal supporter of the Union cause. After the emancipation, he joined Douglass in advocating the priority of black suffrage. He remained throughout his life an advocate for African Americans, and in his final printed circular, he blamed the Republican Party for its failure to assure legislation to protect black civil rights. Harriet was born on June 14, 1811, as the 7th child to a famous Protestant preacher. She is known mostly for Uncle Tom's Cabin, which focused mainly on the public interest of slavery. This book was translated to more than 60 languages and helped contribute to the outbreak of the war by personalizing the political and economic arguments about slavery. Stowe's informal writing style inspired people in a way that political speeches, tracts, and newspapers could not. Uncle Tom's Cabin helped many 19th century Americans determine what type of country they wanted. I wrote what I did because as a woman and a mother, I was oppressed and broken-hearted with the sorrows and injustice that I saw. Because as a Christian, I felt a dishonor to Christianity. Because as a lover of my country, I trembled at the coming day of wrath. These people and many other abolitionists began the anti-slavery movement. They petitioned, argued, freed slaves, and literally fought for their human rights. Due to their perseverance and hard work, the Emancipation Proclamation was finally passed on January 1st, 1863, which would ensure the freedom of all slaves. If it weren't for these abolitionists and their passion to willingly end slavery, slavery may have continued for many more years. After so many years, slavery had finally come to an end. Don't forget, anything is possible as long as you don't stop.